We've now got an app bar at the top of our screen, we've got our floating button down at the bottom right, and I think we're making a little bit of progress. As a quick reminder, the overall goal of our application is to make sure that every time a user presses the button right here, we show one additional image on the screen. So if the user presses the button 10 times, I want to show 10 images. Now, as we try to build out this application, if we just beeline trying to get those images on the screen, we're going to have to write out a lot of confusing code very quickly. So I want to take a little bit more incremental approach. So to get a little bit more incremental approach in building this application, we're going to set ourselves a little bit easier, more immediate goal. I want to add in a little piece of text on our screen for right now. So I want to add like a piece of text right there. By default, I want it to say 0 images. And then every time a user clicks on the button right here, I want to increment this text to stay like 1 images, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So rather than showing an actual image, we're just going to have a little bit of text that increments every time the user presses that button. I know that sounds like it might be a little bit boring, but in reality, this little piece of text right here is very similar to what we're actually trying to do. Remember, every time we press the button, I want to show an additional image. So having a little counter is actually not that far off from what we're trying to accomplish. Okay, so let's talk about how we're going to achieve this, because it's actually going to be a little bit more complicated than you might think. So I want to first give you a quick reminder on some of the differences between stateless widgets and stateful widgets. Now we looked at this diagram previously, but I changed the text at the bottom just a little bit. Right now, our app widget is a stateless widget. That means that it has no instance variables that are going to change over time. And that's absolutely true of our app widget as it stands right now. But if we go back to our mockup right over here, clearly as we're pressing on that button, we're going to need to have some counter variable that's going to change over time. And I think that it's probably going to make sense to tie that counter variable to our app widget. So because we want to have a piece of information tied to a widget that's going to change over time, and we want those changes to be reflected on the screen of our device, we're going to have to refactor our app widget into a stateful widget instead. So this entire process that we're about to embark upon is going to be refactoring our stateless widget to be a stateful widget instead. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Stephen, whatever, that sounds good. Let's go back over to our app component, app widget right here, and we'll just change stateless widget right here to stateful. Well, unfortunately, no, that doesn't quite work out. So this right here, not quite how we do that refactor. It's a much more involved process that's going to involve a couple of different steps. So I want to first tell you about exactly what we're going to do. Then we're going to do it, and we'll talk about what we did. So we're going to really cover this from all angles. All right, so here's the plan. In this section and the next one, we're going to first get started by doing a refactor of that app widget into a stateful widget. Right after that, we're going to have a quick discussion on a weird bit of syntax that we're going to see while we are doing that refactor. And then immediately after that, we'll talk about why these stateful widgets are so much more complicated to write than stateless ones. All right, that's the plan for the next couple of sections. So let's get started right now with that refactor. All right, so here's the guide. Here's what we need to do. So a couple different steps in here. We're going to first get started by breaking our widget, the app widget that we already put together, that class, into 2 separate classes. We're going to refer to one as the widget itself, and then the second class that we're going to add in, we're going to refer to as the widget's state. The widget state right here is going to be a class that contains the data that we want to wrap up inside of our widget. So in our case, it's probably going to be like an integer of some sort that counts the number of times that a user has pressed that button. So we'll start with this step right here first, and then we'll move on to the next one in just a moment. So I'm going to flip back over to my code editor. Here's my app.dart file with my app widget. I'm going to first get started by creating a second class inside of here, right above the existing one. I'm going to call this class app, and it's going to extend stateful widget. I'll then find the existing app widget we had put together, and I'm going to change the name of this one from simply app to app state, like so. And then I'm going to change extend stateless widget right here to something else, and this is where that weird bit of syntax that I just mentioned is going to come into play. So we're going to write out state. I'm going to put a less than sign, greater than sign, and then in between those, I'll write out app, like so. Okay, so that's step one of our refactor. Now, like I just said in that diagram 2 seconds ago, this is that weird bit of syntax right here. We're going to have an entire lecture to talk about what exactly is going on right here. So we will cover this in just a little bit, but for right now, we'll just leave it as is. All right, so at this point, we have now covered our step one right here of our multi-step process of refactoring a stateless widget into a stateful widget. So let's take a quick pause right now. We'll come back to the next section and we'll move on to step two.